She didn't know the man watching her from the corner booth had already decided to burn down half the city for her. And she wouldn't find out until the night her own brother sold her to people who didn't see women as human beings. This is a story about what happens when the most dangerous man alive looks at a broken girl and recognizes something he thought he'd murdered inside himself years ago. If this story reaches you, wherever you are, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this has traveled. Now stay with me until the end. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rain came down mean that night, not the soft kind that makes people nostalgic for something they can't name. The brutal kind. The kind that finds every crack in your jacket collar and drives cold water down the back of your neck like a punishment. It hammered the industrial district in waves, turning the gutters into fast-moving rivers of cigarette filters and fast food wrappers, and whatever else the city couldn't be bothered to hold on to anymore. The Starlight Diner sat at the edge of all of it. It was the kind of place that had never been photographed for a magazine, never been called charming by anyone who mattered, never been anything other than exactly what it was. A yellowed, flickering box of linoleum floors and vinyl booths where people came when they had nowhere better to be and couldn't afford to pretend otherwise. The neon sign in the window buzzed on and off in an irregular rhythm, like a dying heartbeat. The coffee was burnt. The pie had been in its plastic dome since Tuesday. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed at a frequency that made your back teeth ache if you sat under them too long. Elena Hartwell had been sitting under them for 6 years. She moved through this diner the way people move when they've learned to make themselves small. Not shuffling, not apologetic exactly, but calibrated. Every motion economical. Take up as little space as possible. Refill the coffee without being asked. Smile when smiled at, but not too wide, not the kind of smile that invites conversation. Carry the tray with both hands, even when it wasn't heavy, because dropping things had consequences she'd already learned not to forget. She was 24 years old and she looked 31 on bad nights. Tonight was a bad night. The bruise along her left forearm had darkened from the deep purple it had been yesterday into something worse, a color that didn't have a pleasant name, the kind of color that made the older waitress, Donna, look away fast whenever Elena reached past her to grab an order from the pass-through window. Donna had been looking away for 3 years. She was good at it by now. They both were. Elena kept her sleeve rolled down even in the heat near the kitchen. The diner wasn't crowded. A Thursday night in October, rain like this, most people stayed home. There was a trucker in the back who'd been nursing the same slice of apple pie for 40 minutes. 2 college kids sharing a basket of fries near the window, not talking, both on their phones. A middle-aged woman at the counter who ordered decaf and then stared into it like she was reading her future in the surface tension. And in the farthest corner booth, the one with the cracked vinyl seat that Elena had patched twice with electrical tape, sat a man she'd never seen before. She noticed him the way she noticed anything unfamiliar in the diner. Automatically. Without drama. The habit of a woman who'd learned that strange men in new places required assessment. He was sitting with his back to the wall. That was the first thing. Not the window side. The wall. The booth tucked deepest into the corner where you could see the entire room without any of the room seeing your back. His overcoat was charcoal wool, expensive in a way that didn't announce itself, just existed quietly the way real money always did. He had a cup of black coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. His hands were on the table, still. Not fidgeting, not scrolling through a phone, not doing anything at all, just resting. He was watching the room. Or more accurately, Elena realized when she finally looked directly at him, he was watching her. She felt it before she confirmed it, that specific prickling at the back of the neck that women develop early and spend their whole lives trying to categorize. This one didn't feel predatory exactly. It felt assessing, like being looked at by something that was deciding what you were, not what it wanted to do with you. She broke the eye contact and went to refill the trucker's coffee. His name was Daryl. She knew this because he came in every Thursday night on his way through and tipped $3 regardless of the total. He had a daughter in Ohio he talked about sometimes, and tonight he looked tired in the specific way that people who drive for a living get tired. Not just sleepy, but hollowed out, like the miles had reached inside and taken something. "Refill?" she asked. "Please." He turned his cup toward her without lifting it off the table. She poured and moved on. The college kids wanted more napkins. The woman at the counter wanted a refill too, decaf again, and Elena didn't point out that it was past 10 o'clock, And what was the point of decaf at 10 o'clock anyway, because it wasn't her business. And nothing here was her business except the order pad and the coffee pot, and making it to midnight without incident. She circled back toward the corner booth. The man hadn't moved. "Can I get you anything else?" she asked. Automatic, neutral. Up close, he was older than she'd initially thought. Mid-40s, maybe, though it was the kind of age that came from living hard rather than living long. His face had that quality of having been handsome once, and still being handsome now, but in a different way. The youthful version carved down to something raw and more angular. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that weren't from laughing. His jaw carried 2 days of dark stubble, and he wore it the way men wear things they don't think about. His eyes were the problem. Dark gray, or possibly dark green. The lighting in the diner made everything look a little jaundiced. But it wasn't the color that stopped her. It was the stillness in them. She'd seen eyes like that before, but only once, when she was 12 years old and her father had taken her to the zoo, and she'd stood in front of the jaguar enclosure for too long, and the jaguar had looked back at her with exactly that quality of total and absolute patience. "Coffee's fine," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. Chicago accent, she thought, or somewhere close to it. She nodded and turned to go. "You've been flinching every time the door opens," he said. Elena stopped. She turned back slowly. He was still just looking at her, not leaning forward, not making it aggressive, just stating a thing he'd observed. "Excuse me?" she said. "The door," he said. "Every time it opens, you turn toward it, not curious, defensive. Shoulder comes up before you even know you're doing it." The words landed somewhere cold in her chest. She kept her face even. "Long shift, I'm tired." "Sure," he said. He looked back down at his coffee. She walked away. In the kitchen, she stood with her back to the wall for a moment and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum where the cold feeling had lodged itself. Donna was pulling a tray of glasses out of the washer and the steam billowed around her, and neither of them said anything. Elena breathed. In, out, slow. He'd noticed. That was the problem. Most people didn't notice. Most people who sat in the Starlight Diner on a rainy Thursday night were too deep in their own problems to pay attention to someone else's. They didn't notice the sleeves or the flinching or the way Elena always positioned herself near the kitchen entrance, so she had somewhere to retreat to. They didn't notice because they weren't paying that kind of attention. That man was paying that kind of attention. She didn't know what to do with that. She went back out, and the next 40 minutes passed without incident. The trucker paid and left. The college kids argued quietly over the check and then left too. The woman at the counter ordered a slice of the apple pie after all, and ate it slowly and left without leaving a tip, which was fine. Elena had stopped taking it personally. The man in the corner booth remained. The diner had emptied to almost nothing when the front door banged open and the cold, wet air rushed in, and with it came Marcus Del Rey, who was not a regular customer so much as a recurring problem. Elena heard the bell above the door and turned before she could stop herself, shoulder coming up exactly like the man had said. Marcus was 32, heavy-set, wearing a North Face jacket that was damp from the rain and smelled of something sweet and chemical underneath the wet fabric. He had glassy eyes and the specific kind of loose confidence that came from whatever he'd been drinking or taking or both. He'd been in twice before. The first time Elena had handled it. The second time Donna had stepped in. Neither time had gone smoothly. He saw Elena immediately. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice had that blurred quality, the vowels slightly soft. "Take a seat, and I'll be right with you," she said. Automatic. Kept moving toward the counter. He didn't take a seat. He moved to the counter where she'd gone and leaned on it with both forearms, getting himself into her sight line. "Cold night," he said. "You look like you could use some company." "I'm working," she said. "What can I get for you?" "How about you get me your number first?" She kept her eyes on the counter. "Coffee? We've got pie." His hand came across the counter and grabbed her wrist. Not hard exactly, but hard enough. The kind of grab that isn't asking. Elena's whole body went rigid. The specific, terrible stillness of someone who has learned through experience that sudden movement makes it worse. Her heart was pounding so fast she could feel it in her teeth. "Come on," Marcus said. "Don't be like that." The diner had gone very quiet. Then a voice came from the corner booth. Not loud, not sharp. Quiet, actually, the way a knife is quiet. "Let go of her." Marcus turned his head. Elena turned her head. At the back of the diner, the man in the charcoal overcoat had not stood up, had not raised his voice. He was sitting exactly as he'd been sitting for the last hour and a half, hands on the table, coffee in front of him. But something in the room had changed. The air had a different pressure to it. Even Donna, who had been coming out of the kitchen, had stopped completely. Marcus laughed. It wasn't a confident laugh. "Mind your own business, old man." The man in the booth said nothing else. He just looked at Marcus, just looked at him. And something in Marcus's face shifted. The loose confidence drained slowly, like water finding a crack. His hand released Elena's wrist. Not dramatically. He just let go. And then he looked down at his own hand like he wasn't sure how it had gotten there. "Whatever," Marcus muttered. He backed up 2 steps. "I was just leaving anyway." He left. The bell above the door chimed twice. The diner breathed. Elena stood at the counter with her wrist against her chest and her heart still going too fast, and looked at the man in the corner booth, who had gone back to looking at his coffee with the same calm he'd had all night, as though nothing at all had just happened. She stood there for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she picked up the coffee pot and walked to the back booth. She was pouring, refilling a cup that didn't need refilling, just needing something to do with her hands, when her elbow caught the edge of the table and the carafe tilted and coffee went across the surface in a hot brown flood. She jerked back, and in the motion her right hand knocked against the booth divider and the jar of sugar went over and crashed to the floor, and she reached for it and lost her balance and caught herself on the seat edge with her left arm extended and the sleeve pulled up past the elbow. Both of them saw it at the same time. The bruises were not ambiguous. They were not the result of bumping into a door frame or sleeping on her arm wrong. They were the result of fingers, multiple fingers, gripping hard enough to leave the distinct impression of knuckles on skin. 5 separate marks arranged in a pattern that only came from one thing. Elena yanked the sleeve down. The coffee was still spreading across the table. She reached for the napkin dispenser with hands that were shaking now, not from the near fall, but from the fact that he'd seen it, and she could feel his gaze on her arm, even through the fabric. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out too thin. "I'll get towels." "Sit down," he said. "I need to clean this up." "The coffee can wait." His voice was still quiet, still utterly unhurried. "Sit down." She didn't sit down. She stood with a fistful of paper napkins pressing into the coffee spill and stared at the table between them and tried to figure out which way out of this was least terrible. "Who did that to you?" he asked. "I'm clumsy," she said. "I fall down a lot." "That's not what those bruises are." "You don't know what they are." "I know exactly what they are." No judgment in his voice, no horror, no performative outrage. Just factual. The way a man talks when he's seen enough of the world that he's finished being surprised by it. "I've been looking at them for an hour. They're 4 days old. The ones on the inside of your upper arm are newer. 2 days, maybe." "Whoever did it used their right hand." Elena said nothing. Her throat had closed. "Who did that to you?" he asked again. The stupid thing, the thing she would think about later, in the weeks after, trying to understand why, was that it wasn't the gentleness in his voice that broke her. She'd had gentle voices. Donna had a gentle voice. Social workers had gentle voices. Gentle voices didn't undo her anymore. She'd built walls specifically against gentle voices. What broke her was the precision. The fact that he'd looked at her arm and calculated the age of the bruises. The handedness of whoever made them. The fact that he'd been paying attention not in the vague sympathetic way people perform paying attention, but in the specific, detailed, observational way of someone for whom information about injuries was just part of how he moved through the world. It made her believe he would actually understand what she said, and she was so tired of not being understood. "My father," she said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "And my brother." The silence that followed was the longest 5 seconds of her recent life. When she finally looked at him, his face had not changed dramatically. He wasn't appalled. He wasn't doing that thing people did where they immediately started offering solutions or asking how long or saying, "Oh, honey." He was just sitting there, absorbing what she'd said, and the stillness in him had taken on a different quality. Not heavier, exactly, more deliberate. "Sit down," he said, for the 3rd time. And this time his voice had something in it she recognized on instinct even before she could name it. The tone of someone who is not asking. She sat down. His name, he told her, was Vincent. He didn't offer a last name, and she didn't ask for one. He asked her questions, and the questions were specific. How long? What kind? Did she have somewhere to go that they didn't know about? He didn't ask them in a rush, didn't write anything down, didn't look at her with the flinching discomfort people showed when they were asking about things that made them uncomfortable. He looked at her steady and even, and she answered him in pieces, slowly, like pulling splinters out of skin. She told him about the apartment she shared with her father, Danny Hartwell, 51 years old, a man whose legitimate business dealings had dried up 8 years ago and who had since filled the gap with gambling and temper and the particular cruelty of someone who needed to feel power somewhere, anywhere, and had chosen his daughter as the easiest target. She told him about her brother Kyle, 28, who had his father's vices and his mother's capacity for disappearing when things got bad. Except Kyle didn't disappear anymore, hadn't in 2 years. Because Kyle had developed habits that needed financing, and financing required leverage, and the only leverage Kyle had over his father was mutual, and the only leverage either of them had over the world was Elena. Vincent listened to all of it. Then he asked, very calmly, "What did they do with the money?" She looked at him. "What money?" "Whatever they took from you, whatever you gave them to keep the peace." She'd given them portions of her paycheck for 3 years, 100 here, 200 there, sometimes more, when there was an urgency to the asking. She'd told herself it was temporary. She'd told herself a lot of things. "I don't know exactly," she said. "Gambling? Mostly. Kyle has other things. Drugs, probably. He doesn't tell me." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know who they owe?" Something cold slid down Elena's spine. "What?" "Gambling debts. In this part of the city, gambling debts go to specific people. I want to know if you know who." She opened her mouth to say she didn't know and then stopped. Because she did know, actually. Had known for 6 months, but had been doing the thing she always did with information that terrified her, which was store it in a locked room in the back of her mind and refuse to open the door. She'd heard the name in a phone call between her father and Kyle that she wasn't supposed to overhear. She'd heard it twice more since then, attached to numbers that made her nauseous. "The Black Serpents," she said. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Vincent's face. Not fear, not surprise. Something that looked more like a door closing quietly. "How much?" he said. "I don't know the exact number. I heard my father say 80 once. 80,000. But that was 4 months ago." Vincent said nothing. He picked up his coffee cup for the first time all night and drank from it slowly, and Elena watched him and felt the cold thing in her spine spreading outward into her ribs. "Who are you?" she asked. He set the cup down. "Someone who knows who the Black Serpents are." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the rain kept coming down. The fluorescent tube above them flickered once, twice. The diner was very quiet. "My name is Vincent Moretti," he said. The name hit her like stepping off a curb in the dark. She knew the name, not from direct contact. She moved in circles too small and too ordinary for direct contact. But in a city like this one, certain names moved through the air the way weather did. You heard them in the diner, in the bus stop, in the back corners of grocery stores. You heard them in the particular way that people lowered their voices around certain subjects. Vincent Moretti was one of those subjects. She sat very still. "You're afraid now," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not." "You are," he said. "That's fine. It's reasonable." He leaned back slightly against the booth. "But I want you to understand something. I've been sitting here for 2 hours. I've watched you. I saw what happened with that man at the counter. I saw your arm." He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you." "People say that," Elena said carefully. "People say a lot of things." He reached into the inside pocket of his overcoat and placed a card on the table between them. White. Just a phone number, no name. "If something happens tonight, anything at all, you call that number. Someone will answer." She didn't touch the card. "Why?" He looked at her. The jaguar quality was back in his eyes, that absolute unhurried patience. "Because you don't deserve what's being done to you," he said simply. "And because I'm in a position to do something about it." Elena stared at him. She wanted to say something sharp and self-sufficient, She had a whole wardrobe of sharp and self-sufficient things she said to men who thought they were going to fix her problems. She'd been wearing that wardrobe for years, but underneath it was something she couldn't quite extinguish tonight. The bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and the terrible, treacherous flicker of wanting, just once, to put it down. She didn't say the sharp thing. She left the card on the table. Vincent paid his bill, left an amount of cash that was 4 times what the coffee cost, and stood and buttoned his overcoat with the same unhurried calm he had had all evening. He walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on it. "Go home a different way tonight," he said, without turning around. "Not the alley." Then he pushed the door open and walked out into the rain, and the bell above the door chimed once, and Elena stood behind the counter with the coffee pot in her hand and watched the headlights of a black SUV pull away from the curb and disappear into the wet dark. She stood there for a long time. Then she picked up the white card from the table and slid it into the pocket of her apron, next to her order pad and her pen and the 3 crumpled dollars from the trucker in Ohio. She didn't go home the alleyway that night. She went the long way around through the lit streets, collar up against the rain, walking faster than usual, trying not to think about the name she'd said out loud, or the name he'd given back to her, or the way neither of those names was one you said casually in this city, after dark. She was 4 blocks from her building when her phone buzzed, Kyle's name on the screen. She almost didn't answer it. She knew his midnight calls, knew the specific quality of desperation in them, knew that answering would cost her something she couldn't afford. But the alternative was going home to her father, and sometimes Kyle was a buffer between her and what her father became after 10 o'clock, so she answered. "Where are you?" Kyle said. His voice was wrong, not drunk wrong or high wrong, which she knew well. Something else. Tight, scared. "Walking home," she said. "What's wrong?" "Don't come home yet." "Kyle, Dad needs to talk to you," he said. "About money. About... Look, it's complicated. There's a situation." "How much?" Elena said. Flat. She'd had this conversation in 100 different versions. "It's not just money this time." A pause. She could hear him breathing. Rain on her hood. A car going past. "Dad signed something, Lena." She stopped walking. "What does that mean?" "What did he sign?" Another pause, longer this time. She could hear something in the background, big voices, at least 2, not her father. The voices had a specific quality she didn't recognize. "Kyle." Her voice had gone very even, the way voices go when panic hasn't hit the throat yet, but the mind already knows. "What did he sign?" His next words came out small and terrible, and they rearranged every single thing about the night she'd thought she was having. "He signed you," Kyle said, "to the Black Serpents. As, they're calling it collateral, but Lena, they're coming tonight. To pick you up. They're coming at midnight." Elena looked at her phone screen. 10:47 p.m. She had 73 minutes. Her hand went into her apron pocket, past the order pad, past the crumpled bills. Her fingers closed around the white card. She called the number. It rang once. Just once, and then a man's voice came on the line. Not Vincent, someone else, younger sounding, clipped and alert in the way of someone who had been awake and waiting. "Yeah, Vincent gave me this number," Elena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Her feet had started moving again without her deciding to move, carrying her sideways off the main street into the yellow circle of a bus shelter awning. Rain hammered the plastic roof above her head. He said to call if something happened. Name? Elena. Elena Hartwell. I was at the Starlight Diner tonight. I know who you are. A brief pause. She heard something in the background, a door, footsteps. What happened? She told him. Fast and tight, the way you tell things when you don't have time to organize them into anything comfortable. The call from Kyle. The words he signed you. The timeline. 73 minutes, now 71. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. Don't go home, the voice said. Don't go anywhere near your building. You stay in a lit public area, you stay moving, and you do not talk to anyone until I call you back on this number. Understood? Understood, she said. The line went dead. Elena stood under the bus shelter and listened to the rain and tried to understand what her body was doing, which was shaking. Not dramatically. The small internal kind, the kind that starts in the core and moves outward in waves that you can't entirely stop no matter how hard you clench your jaw. She pressed her back against the cold plastic wall of the shelter and breathed through her nose and counted her breaths the way she'd taught herself to do years ago when counting was the only tool she had. A couple ran past under a shared umbrella, laughing. A cab went by with its light off. The city kept moving around her like she was a stone in water and the water didn't care. Her phone buzzed again. Kyle. She stared at his name on the screen, felt the familiar pull, the one that had been pulling at her for 28 years, the pull of a woman who had spent her whole life trying to believe that the people who hurt her were also, somewhere underneath the hurting, the people who loved her. It was a stupid pull. She knew it was stupid. She answered it anyway. Lena, listen. I know what you did, she said. Silence. Lena, don't. The word came out with more edge than she intended, but she didn't pull it back. Don't do the thing where you explain. Don't do the voice. I know what he signed. I know what tonight is. I'm not coming home. You don't understand the situation. His voice had shifted into something she recognized, the specifically shameless gear her brother had for when he needed something bad enough. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, okay? It's a collateral arrangement. It's like, Kyle. She closed her eyes. The rain on the shelter roof was very loud. Tell me what you did. All of it. From the beginning. Right now. Another silence. Longer. She could hear him breathing, and in the breath she could hear the calculation. How much to say. How much to hold back, where the exits were. Dad's been into Carver Wolf for about 8 months, Kyle said finally. The Black Serpents run the book. The debt's been building. He kept thinking he'd cover it. You know how he is. He keeps thinking the next one's going to... How much? 93 now. Interest. $93,000. The number sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. And, she said, and Carver called in the note 2 weeks ago. Said he wanted payment or equivalent value by end of October. Dad's been scrambling. There were some other things he tried that didn't work out. A pause. 3 days ago, Wolf's guys came to the apartment. Not the collection guys. The other ones. Elena understood what the other ones meant. She had grown up adjacent to enough of this world through her father's orbit to understand the difference between a collection call and a visit from the other ones. They gave him an option, Kyle continued. Said they had a contractor moving through the region. Needed a temporary. They called it a companion arrangement. 3 months. Said they'd wipe the debt. The cold in Elena's chest spread into her throat. A companion arrangement, she repeated. Lena. Say what it is, Kyle. Out loud. Say what you and Dad agreed to. The silence this time was different. Smaller. The silence of a man who knew exactly what he'd done and had spent 3 days building walls around the knowledge so he didn't have to look directly at it. They want to sell you, Elena said. Her voice came out flat because she had made it flat on purpose. Because if she let it be anything other than flat right now, it would become something she couldn't control. 3 months or permanent, doesn't matter what they called it in the paperwork. That's what it is. It's not. The contract says, I don't care what the contract says. She opened her eyes. The bus shelter, the rain. Her own hands, pale and steady now with the specific steadiness of someone who has gone past the shaking stage into something colder. I want to know one thing. Did you argue? When they put the paper in front of Dad, did you say anything? Did you try to stop it? The silence was her answer. I thought so, she said. She hung up. She stood there for 3 more minutes. Then the phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, different from the one she'd called. She answered it, and Vincent's voice came on the line, and it was the same as it had been in the diner, unhurried, quiet, carrying that specific gravity. I know about Wolf, he said. I know about the contract. My people are already moving. Moving where? Your building. Kyle's phone has been tracked since you called. We know the Serpents are sending a pickup at midnight. 3 vehicles, 6 men. They're not there yet. A brief pause. Are you safe where you are? I'm under a bus shelter on Carver Street. There's a restaurant called Marino's 2 blocks north of you. It'll be on your left. Open until 2. Go in, sit at the bar, order something. Don't leave until someone comes to you and says the word November. November, she repeated. Go now. She went. Marino's was an Italian place that was just past its best years, the kind of red sauce institution that had been feeding the neighborhood since before most of the neighborhood's current residents were born. At 11 o'clock on a Thursday, it was two-thirds empty. She sat at the bar and ordered a club soda because her stomach wouldn't take anything else, and the bartender, a wide man with a gray mustache, set it in front of her without comment and moved back to wiping glasses. She sat there and she thought about the number 93,000. She thought about what 3 months meant to the Black Serpent's idea of a companion arrangement. She thought about her father's hands on the pen, signing. She thought about Kyle's silence on the phone. She'd always known, abstractly, that she was the only functional person in her family. The only one with a job, steady income, a structure to her days. She'd known it the way you know unpleasant things that you live with. Not constantly, not with full attention, but as a permanent background hum. What she hadn't entirely let herself know, until tonight, was what that functionality looked like from the outside. From the outside, to men like Carver Wolf, she looked like an asset. The club soda was flat. She drank it anyway. At 11:24, a man sat down on the stool beside her. Young, maybe 25, with the kind of unremarkable face you didn't look at twice. Medium height, dark jacket, the sort of person who moved through spaces without snagging attention. He ordered a beer and took a slow sip, and then said, without looking at her, November. Elena breathed out. We need to move, he said quietly, still not looking directly at her, eyes forward on the bar mirror. The pickup crew changed their time. They're moving up. How far up? They're at your building now. She felt the bar stool tilt slightly under her. Or maybe that was just her, something in her equilibrium going briefly wrong. She put her hand flat on the bar counter. My stuff, she said. Everything I have is in that apartment. I know. He took another sip of beer, unhurried. We're not going back for it tonight. I know. His voice was not unkind. Car's outside, let's go. She stood up, left a 10 on the bar, walked out behind him into the rain. The car was a black Tahoe idling at the curb. A man behind the wheel she couldn't see clearly through the wet glass. The young man opened the rear door for her, and she got in, and he got in beside her, and the driver pulled into traffic without being told. And they moved through the city in the kind of practiced silence that told her everyone in this vehicle did this kind of thing regularly. They drove for 12 minutes. She tracked the streets out the window without being obvious about it. North, then east, then into a neighborhood that was quieter and older, streets lined with actual trees, buildings that had kept their facades. The car stopped in front of a narrow brownstone with lit windows on the second floor. Inside, the young man said. She went inside. The interior was clean and deliberately anonymous. Good furniture, but nothing personal. No photographs. Nothing on the walls that would tell you anything about the people who used the space. She sat on a couch, and someone brought her tea she hadn't asked for, and she held the mug in both hands and stared at the floor. 20 minutes later, Vincent arrived. He came through the front door without knocking, moving quickly, his overcoat still damp from the rain. Behind him were two other men, neither of them the young man from the bar, different, older, the kind of men who had the particular build that came from discipline and not a gym. They stopped at the door. Vincent came further into the room. He looked at Elena and did a fast assessment, top to bottom. Not the kind men do to women in bars. The kind a field medic does. Checking for damage. You're okay, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm okay, she confirmed. He sat down across from her in a straight-back chair and leaned his elbows on his knees and looked at her with the gray-green eyes and said, Tell me what your brother told you. She told him. All of it. 93,000, the contract, the 3 months that weren't really 3 months, the fact that Kyle had been on the phone while the pickup men were presumably already in the building. When she finished, Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Carver Wolf runs the Eastern Docks, he said finally. The Black Serpents move product. Narcotics, mostly, some weapons, some other things. They run a secondary operation out of the harbor warehouses. The contractor your brother mentioned, that's real. They move women to specific clients on a rotation, has been running for 2 years. Elena sat with that information and didn't let herself react to it visibly. Wolf knows who you are now, Vincent continued. The pickup crew finding an empty apartment tonight doesn't end it. It complicates it. Meaning he'll look for you. He paused. My name is attached to the Starlight Diner loosely. If his people were watching tonight, which is possible, he knows you made contact. The implications of that arranged themselves in Elena's head one by one. So now I'm a problem for you, she said. No. His voice was direct. You were a woman who got sold by her family. Now you're a woman under my protection. That's different. I didn't ask for your protection. No, he said. You didn't. The silence between them had weight. Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. Not the managed neutral look she used on customers and difficult people, but actually looked and tried to figure out what was real inside this man who had materialized in her corner booth and dismantled her whole night with a precise series of quiet observations. Why? She said. I don't understand why. You don't know me. Something moved across his face. Not quite discomfort. Something older than that. I grew up in a house where women got hurt, he said. The words came out flat and uninflected, the way people say things they've said to themselves too many times to have any performance left in them. My mother, my sister, until she got old enough to run. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. I built an empire on a lot of things I'm not going to defend to you, but there are lines. And my father crossed one. Your father crossed several. Elena held the tea mug. It had gone lukewarm. What happens now? Tonight you stay here. This is a safe house. My people use it. Tomorrow morning we assess. He paused. Your father and brother. I need to find them before Wolf does. Why? Because if Wolf finds them first and leans on them, your location becomes a negotiating chip. He said it the same way he'd said everything, without drama, the way a man describes weather. Their debt is a problem I can resolve. Their location is a problem I need to control. Elena looked at the floor, the tea mug, the strange, clean, anonymous room. My whole life is in that apartment, she said. Her voice was quieter now. My savings, my documents. There's a coffee tin in the kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator. I've been putting cash in it for 2 years. She looked up. $3,000. I was going to use it to get out. Vincent looked at her for a moment. Then he turned his head slightly toward the doorway and said a single name, quietly. The young man appeared. The Hartwell apartment on Bridgewater. 3rd floor, Unit 3C. Kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator. Coffee tin. He paused. Documents too, whatever you can find. The young man nodded and was gone. Vincent looked back at Elena. It'll take an hour, he said. Try to sleep. I won't sleep. I know, he said. Try anyway. He stood up and moved toward a door on the far side of the room that she'd assumed was a closet. It wasn't. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Your brother, he said, without turning. He called you tonight? Warned you. Elena said nothing. He warned you late, Vincent said. But he warned you. He paused. Keep that somewhere separate from everything else he did tonight. Then he went through the door, and she was alone in the anonymous room with the lukewarm tea and the sound of the rain still coming down outside, and a city full of men who had decided what she was worth without asking her. She didn't sleep. She sat with her knees pulled up on the couch and her back to the armrest and watched the front window where the rain was making rivers down the glass, and she thought about her father's signature on a contract. She tried to make it abstract, clinical, the way she'd made a lot of things over the years. It didn't work tonight. Tonight it just sat in her chest raw and terrible and real. Her father, who she had cooked for and lied to employers for and given money to and flinched away from in the same motion, had signed his name next to hers on a document that valued her at $80,000. Had sat across from Carver Wolf's men at a table somewhere and picked up a pen and decided that $93,000 was worth more than his daughter's body and her life, and the fact that she was a person. She thought, I always knew. And underneath that, I always hoped I was wrong. At 1:15 in the morning, the young man came back. He set the coffee tin on the table in front of her without ceremony. It was dented at the bottom and had a picture of a mountain on the lid, and inside it, when she pried the top off, were the bills exactly as she'd left them, bundled in rubber bands, 3 years of overtime and skipped meals and deliberate smallness. He also put a manila envelope beside it. Inside was her birth certificate, her social security card, her bank card, a photograph that had been on her nightstand. Her and a friend from high school, taken at some beach somewhere, both of them squinting into the sun. She didn't know why the photograph being there undid her when the money hadn't. She held it for a long time. Vincent came back into the room at 2 o'clock and found her sitting exactly where he'd left her, except she'd been crying at some point, evidenced by the specific tightness around her eyes that she couldn't entirely hide. He didn't comment on it. He sat back down across from her. "We found your father," he said. "He's at a bar 2 miles from your building. Kyle is with him." Elena said nothing. "I'm going to have them brought here," Vincent said. "Tonight, before Wolf's people get to them." He paused. "When they get here, you don't have to be in the room. You can stay in the back." "I'll be in the room," Elena said. He looked at her. "I want to be in the room," she said. Something shifted in his expression, barely visible, a small adjustment, like a weight redistributed. "Okay," he said. They arrived 40 minutes later. Her father came through the door first. Danny Hartwell was a big man who had been bigger once, the kind of man whose physical presence had been his primary currency and who had watched it depreciate year by year with the specific bitterness of someone who had nothing else to offer. He was wearing a flannel shirt with a stain at the collar, and his face had the boiled red look of a man who had been drinking for several hours and was now facing the cold air and an unfamiliar room, and, somewhere in the middle of figuring out where he was, his daughter sitting on a couch looking at him with perfectly still eyes. He stopped when he saw her. Kyle came in behind him. Kyle was thinner, sharp-featured, with the hollow quality of someone who spent most of their energy managing the distance between who they were and who they presented. He saw Elena and looked away immediately, to the floor, to the side wall. Anywhere else? Vincent stood near the far door, not blocking it exactly, just present. His 2 men were at the entrance. The room was very quiet. Her father started talking before anyone told him to. That was his way. The preemptive offense, the volume that preceded the actual argument, the noise that was supposed to crowd out everything else. "Now, I don't know who your friend is here, Lena, but you had no business calling—" "Sit down," Vincent said. Danny Hartwell stopped. He turned toward Vincent and his body did the automatic puffing up thing, the chest expansion of a man accustomed to using size as the first word in every argument. He took in Vincent, the overcoat, the stillness, the 2 men behind him, and the puffing slowly deflated. He sat down. Elena watched her father sit. She had watched him her whole life, and she had spent most of that time being afraid of him, and some of it hating herself for the fear, and occasionally, in her worst moments, feeling the specific grief of loving someone who only hurt you. Tonight she felt none of those things. She felt a terrible clarity, clean and cold as the rain outside. She looked at her father and she thought, "I see you now, all of you. And there is nothing left to protect." Vincent put a folder on the table. $93,000, he said. "Owed to Carver Wolf and the Black Serpents. Due by end of October." He opened the folder. Inside were documents. She couldn't see them all from where she sat, but she saw her father's handwriting at the bottom of one page and knew, without being told, what she was looking at. "And one signed agreement transferring custody of your daughter as collateral." Her father's jaw worked. "That's a private—" "It's a trafficking document," Vincent said, flat, unapologetic. "I want you to say what it is out loud." Silence. "Say it," Vincent said. Danny Hartwell looked at the floor. Something in his face was collapsing slowly, the architecture of self-justification coming apart under the specific pressure of a room where no one was going to let him redirect. "It was a business arrangement," he said finally, thickly. "It was a trafficking document," Vincent said again. "You signed your daughter to men who move women for money. Say it." Her father said nothing. Kyle made a small sound, barely a word, something that might have been the beginning of an explanation. Vincent looked at him and Kyle's mouth closed. Elena sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing and breathed. Then Vincent set the folder aside and looked at both men across the table and said, "Here is what happens next. I am settling the debt with Wolf tonight. The $93,000 disappears. The contract disappears. You will both be gone from this city by end of the week. Not suggested. Done. Where you go is your business. What you do is your business. But you do not contact Elena. You do not come back here. You do not use her name with anyone, for any reason. Danny Hartwell's chin came up. You can't just— I can, Vincent said, and I will. The alternative is that I don't settle the debt, and I let Wolf have you both. He paused one beat. He won't be as structured as I am. Her father looked at his hands. Kyle still wasn't looking at anyone. Do you understand the terms? Vincent said. A silence that lasted a long time. Then her father said, in a voice she'd never heard from him before, small, stripped of everything, yes. Vincent looked at Kyle. Kyle nodded without lifting his head. Vincent picked up the folder. My people will drive you back tonight. You'll have 48 hours in the city to collect what you need. After that, he glanced at the two men by the door, a single quiet nod. We verify you're gone. He walked toward the back door again, and Elena's father and brother were escorted out by the men, and the front door closed, and the room was empty except for Elena and Vincent and the sound of rain. Elena sat for a long time without speaking. Is that it? She finally said. That's all that happens to them. Vincent turned back. He read something in her face. What do you want to happen to them? She thought about it honestly, which she hadn't let herself do before. I don't know, she said. I thought there'd be more. I thought I'd feel more. He sat back down across from her. Said nothing, just let the space stay open. I feel like I've been carrying a building, she said slowly, and someone just took it off me. And now I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my hands. He looked at her. That feeling doesn't go away fast, he said, but it does go away. She looked at him. How do you know? He didn't answer right away. When he did, the words were careful, like he'd picked each one separately. Because I felt it. She didn't push. Something in his voice said there was a door there and it wasn't open, and she didn't need it to be open right now. What she needed was to sleep and to stop shaking and to figure out what her life looked like when it wasn't organized around surviving the people in it. The debt, she said. $93,000. What about it? That's not nothing. Even for you, that's not nothing. She held his gaze. I need to understand what that costs me. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Nothing, he said. Things always cost something, she said. Yes, he said. Usually. He looked at her steadily. This doesn't. She searched his face for the lie. She was good at finding lies, had been trained by circumstance to be good at it. She looked at him for a long moment and could not find one, which was, in its own way, the most terrifying thing that had happened to her all night. Because she had spent 24 years knowing the shape of men who wanted things from her. She knew what that looked like, felt like, sounded like. It had a specific weight. Vincent Moretti didn't have that weight, and she had no framework for what to do with a man who didn't. She opened her mouth to say something, she didn't know what, and then her phone buzzed on the cushion beside her, and the name on the screen wasn't Kyle, and wasn't her father, and wasn't any number she recognized. She turned it so Vincent could see. His face changed. Not much. Not dramatically. But the stillness in him shifted into something different, concentrated, sharper, the quality of a man who has just heard a sound in the dark that he recognizes. He took the phone from her, looked at the number, and said one word. Wolf. And in that word, in the particular flatness of it, the way it landed in the room, Elena understood that whatever she'd thought tonight was, whatever chapter she'd believed was closing, it was not closing. It was beginning. Moment. Vincent didn't answer the call. He held Elena's phone in his hand and looked at the number for exactly 3 seconds, and then set it face down on the table with the deliberate care of someone handling something that bites. He turned toward the door and said a name, Marco, and one of the men from outside appeared immediately in the frame. Wolf has this number, Vincent said. Marco looked at the phone. Something passed across his face that was not quite alarm but was in the neighborhood. How long? Unknown. Get Reyes on the line. I want to know if the diner had eyes on it tonight. Camera, a spotter, anything. He paused. And I want to know how Wolf got a direct line to a civilian contact number inside of 4 hours. Marco was gone before Vincent finished the sentence. Elena watched this exchange and felt the quality of the room change around her, the same way air changes before a storm, pressure dropping, everything becoming briefly too still. She'd grown up around men who performed authority. Her father did it with volume. The men he owed money to did it with the specific casual cruelty of people who had never been told no. What Vincent did was different from both of those things. He didn't perform anything. He just moved, and the room reorganized itself around the movement. "He knows where I am," she said. "He knows you made contact with someone." Vincent picked up his own phone from his jacket. "Whether he knows specifics, not yet." He looked at her. "Are there people in your life who know about tonight? Anyone you texted before you called that number?" "No one? Family outside your father and brother?" "No." "Friends who might have seen you leave the diner?" She thought about it. Donna had been in the kitchen when she left. The trucker was gone. The college kids. She shook her head slowly. "Then the diner had eyes," Vincent said. "Wolf's operation is territorial. He tracks movement on his blocks." He looked at his phone screen, and she could see from across the room that there were messages coming in, several of them, the screen lighting in quick succession. His jaw tightened fractionally. "Reyes is confirming. There was a car across from the Starlight most of the night. Standard surveillance." "They saw you come in," Elena said. "They saw me come in," he confirmed. She absorbed this. "So they already knew about the connection before the pickup crew went to my building." "It's possible they adjusted their timeline for that reason." He looked up from the phone. "It's also possible Wolf is calling that number as a probe to see what answers." "What does he want?" "Right now? Information. Where you are, who has you, what my involvement level is." He set the phone down. "Later. Depends on what he decides my involvement means." Elena thought about what his involvement meant. In the criminal geography of this city, she had enough second-hand knowledge, accumulated over years of proximity to her father's world without being formally part of it, to understand that Carver Wolf and Vincent Moretti were not equivalent entities. Her father owed money to Wolf. Wolf operated the Eastern Docks, ran product, had enforcers with zip ties and specific smiles. He was serious and dangerous. Vincent was something else. She didn't have a precise word for what Vincent was, but she understood intuitively that the distinction between the two men was the distinction between a neighborhood dog that bit and something that lived further up the food chain than dogs. What she didn't understand was why that distinction was now her problem. "Why is he calling me directly?" she said. "If he knows you're involved, why not call you?" Vincent was quiet for a moment. "Because he wants to talk to you before he talks to me." He picked up her phone again, and this time turned it over in his hand, examining it. "He wants to know if you're here voluntarily." Elena went still. "He's going to offer you something," Vincent said. He looked up at her. "That's what this call is. He's going to offer you money, or safety, or a way out that doesn't involve me. He's going to suggest that my protection has a price you don't know about yet." She stared at him. "Does it?" The question landed in the room and sat there. Vincent set the phone down on the table between them, face up, equidistant, like he was placing it on neutral ground. "Answer it," he said. "On speaker. I'll be here." She looked at the phone, then at him. "You want me to answer a call from the man who is going to—" She stopped, reorganized. "You want me to talk to him? I want you to hear what he offers," Vincent said, "and I want you to make whatever decision you make with complete information." She searched his face again for the thing she was always searching for in men's faces. The angle, the leverage point, the place where the performance cracked and showed you what was actually underneath. She'd gotten good at finding it. Years of practice. She couldn't find it in his face. She picked up the phone and answered it. The voice that came out of the speaker was not what she'd expected. She'd built Carver Wolf in her imagination from her father's tense references to him, from the quality of fear that entered her father's body when the name came up. She'd expected something hard and blunt. What she got instead was a voice that was almost warm. Mid-50s, she guessed, or older. The voice of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that smoothness opened more doors than volume. "Elena," he said, like he knew her, like they'd spoken before. She kept her voice even. "Who is this?" "My name is Carver. I think you know why I'm calling. My father's debt. Your father's situation, yes." A slight pause, and in the pause she could hear something ambient, a large space, some kind of echo like a warehouse or a loading dock. I want you to know that I have a great deal of respect for your position. You didn't make these choices. You were put in a situation by people who should have protected you. Vincent was standing 3 feet away, watching her face, not the phone. Like the phone wasn't the important thing. Like she was. What do you want? Elena said. I want to resolve this cleanly, Wolf said. I have a document with your name on it, which I understand you find distressing. I'm prepared to destroy that document tonight, in exchange for a conversation. We're having a conversation, a different kind, in person. Another pause. The man you're with right now, Vincent Moretti. I want you to understand something about him that he won't tell you himself, about why he really took an interest in a waitress in the Starlight Diner. Elena's eyes went to Vincent. His expression hadn't changed. Tell me, she said. Not on the phone, Wolf said. Come to the harbor. Pier 11. Come alone. I'll have the contract. I'll have your father's debt papers. You walk away clean, no attachments, no obligations, no one owning you. She almost laughed. The audacity of it, the specific grotesque irony of the man who had a contract with her name on it framing his offer as the one that left her free. And if I don't come, she said, then I deal with this the other way. His voice didn't change. It was the specific tone of someone stating a logistical fact, which involves your father and your brother, and it involves what I do with your contract, and it involves the question of what Mr. Moretti's interest in you is actually worth to him. A breath. I'd prefer the clean version. Come to Pier 11. The line went dead. Elena set the phone down. The room was very quiet. You heard all of that, she said. Yes. She looked at him. What does he know about you? What was he going to tell me? Vincent was quiet for a long moment. He moved to the window and stood there with his back to her, looking at the rain-streaked glass. She could see his reflection in it, faint, doubled by the wet. And in the reflection, his face had the quality of something that had been distud but not yet spoken. Sit down, he said. I've been sitting down all night, she said. Just say it. He turned from the window. The Starlight Diner, he said. I wasn't there by accident. She'd already suspected it. Somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part that assessed things automatically and without drama, she'd been sitting with the improbability of a man like Vincent Moretti choosing a dying diner in the industrial district for a Thursday night coffee. She'd been sitting with it and not looking directly at it because some part of her wasn't ready. Now she looked directly at it. Why were you there? She said. Your brother contacted one of my associates 3 weeks ago, Vincent said. Kyle came to us looking for a buyer. He was calling it an investment opportunity. He paused. He told my associate he had a female family member, young, no record, no complications. He wanted to know if I had connections to placement networks. The words hit her one by one like something physical. He was trying to sell me himself, she said. Before Wolf. He came to me first, Vincent said. Yes. She stood very still, and the room seemed to tilt slightly, the way rooms tilt when the floor you thought was solid turns out to be something else. My associate turned him down and reported it to me, Vincent continued. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not guilt exactly, more like the specific weight of information that you've been carrying and knew eventually had to be put down in front of someone. I looked into the family. I found out about your father's debt to Wolf, about the situation you were in. I decided to... He stopped. I went to the diner to look at you. To look at me, she repeated, to see what I was dealing with. The cold in her chest was different now from the cold it had been all night. Before it had been fear. This was something else. A specific hollowing quality. The feeling of a story you thought you understood suddenly showing you a different set of foundations. You went to look at the asset, she said, before you decided whether to get involved. That's not... Was I an asset, or wasn't I? Her voice had gone very flat. When you walked into the diner, was I a person to you, or was I a situation to be assessed? He didn't answer immediately. The pause itself was an answer. Both, he said finally. You were both. She breathed through her nose, in, out, the way she'd taught herself. And now? She said. Now you're a person, he said. Clearly. That's not good enough, she said. That's not anywhere near good enough. I know, he said. She turned away from him, walked to the far wall and stood there with her back to him and pressed her palm flat against the plaster, cool and solid under her hand. She stayed like that for a long time, long enough that the rain outside shifted from heavy to something lighter, pattering rather than hammering. She thought about Kyle. Not the Kyle who had called her tonight with the shambling half-warning, not the Kyle who had looked at the floor when their father admitted what he'd signed. The Kyle who had gone to a man like Vincent Moretti 3 weeks ago with her name and her age and the words "no complications." Who had looked at his sister and seen a transaction. Who had been trying to sell her before their father thought of it, which meant her father's move hadn't come from desperation alone. It had come from a precedent. It had come from a household where her value had already been established as something that could be offered. She pressed her hand harder against the plaster. "Tell me the rest," she said, without turning around. "Whatever else there is. Tell me now, all of it, because I need to know what I'm standing in the middle of." "There isn't much more," Vincent said. "I came to the diner to see you. What I saw—" Another pause, and this one had a different texture, slower, was not what I expected. "What did you expect?" "Someone who knew about the situation. Someone complicit in some capacity, maybe. Someone who—" He stopped again. She turned around. "Say it." "Someone I could resolve cleanly," he said. "From a distance. Move money, remove the problem, not have to look at it." She looked at him across the room. The distance between them was maybe 10 feet, and it felt enormous. "But I flinched when the door opened," she said. Something in his face moved. "Yes." "And you stayed." "Yes." She let that sit. She didn't know what to do with it, didn't know if it changed anything, or if the fact that it changed anything made her a fool. She thought about the Jaguar behind glass, the quality of absolute attention. She thought about Kyle going to this man 3 weeks ago with her name. "My brother came to you first," she said, "tried to sell me to you specifically." "Yes. And you came to the diner, and when you saw me, you—" She tried to find the right word. "You changed your approach." "I decided to handle it differently," he said. "Handle it." She turned the phrase over. "That's still not a person, is it? That's still a situation being managed." He was quiet. "I'm not angry," she said, which was partially true. She was something more complicated than angry, something that didn't have a clean name. A compound of betrayal and exhaustion and the specific grief of learning that the version of tonight she'd been slowly, cautiously starting to believe in was built on a different foundation than she'd thought. I need to know what's real. In this room right now, what's actually real." Vincent crossed the room and sat back down in the straight-back chair and leaned his elbows on his knees and looked at her with the gray-green eyes. "What's real," he said, "is that your brother tried to sell you and I didn't buy. What's real is that your father put his name on a document that should not exist and I'm going to destroy it. What's real is that Carver Wolf is at Pier 11 right now waiting for you to come alone so he can—" He stopped. "What he would do to you at Pier 11, Elena. I need you to understand exactly what that is." She already understood. She'd understood from the moment Kyle said the words companion arrangement. "I know what it is," she said. "Then you know that whatever my reasons were for walking into the diner," he said, "the outcome is the same. You're here. You're not there." She sat down. Not because he'd told her to, but because her legs had decided to. She sat on the couch and put her face in her hands for a moment and breathed. The phone on the table buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from the same unknown number. She didn't need to pick it up. Vincent had seen it from where he sat. He reached over and turned the screen so she could read it. 4 words. "Bring her, or else." She read it twice. "Or else what?" she said. Vincent picked up his own phone. His thumb moved across the screen, and then he held it out to her. On it was a photograph. Grainy, clearly taken with a long-range lens, the color washed out by artificial lighting. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. When she understood, something inside her went completely cold. Her father and Kyle were in the photograph. They were sitting in the back of a vehicle. Not her father's car, not anything she recognized. Their faces had the specific blank quality of people who had been told to be very still. Behind them, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a man she didn't know. He was holding something. Marco appeared in the doorway. His face was wrong. Not panicked. Men like this didn't panic, but tight in a way she hadn't seen all night. They moved up the timeline, he said to Vincent. Wolf's already pulled them. We lost the tail on Bridgewater 20 minutes ago. Elena looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at the photograph. He has them, she said. It wasn't a question. Vincent stood up slowly. The quality of his stillness had changed again. Not the patient observational stillness of the diner, not even the controlled assessment of the hours since. This was something older, something that had been waiting underneath all the rest of it like bedrock. Yes, he said. And he wants me, she said. In exchange. He wants me, Vincent said. You're the lever. She absorbed that. The room was very still. Marco hadn't moved from the doorway. The rain outside had slowed to almost nothing, the storm finally exhausting itself, and the quiet that came in behind it was absolute and strange. So my father and my brother, Elena said slowly. The people who sold me, twice, apparently. She heard how that sounded and kept going anyway. They're being used to get to me, to get to you, and Wolf is at the pier with the contract and a lever and the expectation that someone is going to come to him. Yes, Vincent said. She looked at him. What happens if no one comes? Vincent's jaw tightened. He has 30 men at that pier. That's not what I asked. He held her gaze. Your father and brother won't survive the night. She sat with that. She sat with the full weight of it. Her father who had broken her and sold her, her brother who had tried to sell her first, both of them now in the back of a car with a man holding something. Both of them hers, still, in the terrible and involuntary way that people are yours when they are all you came from. She thought, I should feel nothing. She felt everything. Vincent, she said. His name, for the first time, just his name, and something in the simplicity of it shifted the air between them. He looked at her. Tell me what you need me to do, she said. He was quiet for a very long moment. She could see him calculating. The way a man calculates when the variables include things that cannot be recovered if they go wrong. I need you to trust me, he said, completely. No reservations, no secondary plans. What I'm going to do at that pier, I need to do it with you exactly where I put you and not moving until I say. What are you going to do? I'm going to go to Pier 11, he said, and I'm going to end this. She looked at him and thought about Kyle 3 weeks ago with her name in his mouth. Thought about her father's signature. Thought about the photograph on the phone, the blank faces, the man at the edge of the frame. Thought about a jaguar behind glass, watching with absolute patience, waiting for the moment the glass wasn't there anymore. Okay, she said. Vincent turned to Marco and said quietly, get everyone. And in the word everyone, in the weight it carried, Elena understood for the first time with full clarity what kind of man she had placed her life in the hands of, not the abstract understanding she'd been managing all night, but the real version, the version that lived in the marrow. She understood that when Vincent Moretti went to Pier 11, he wasn't going to negotiate. He was going to arrive. And arriving was the last thing Carver Wolf was ever going to see coming. Plus, they moved out at 2:47 in the morning. 4 vehicles, not the conspicuous armored SUVs that Elena had half expected from the movies her brain kept trying to run, but ordinary-looking sedans and a panel van, dark colors, nothing that announced itself. The men who filled them were 11 in total, and they moved with the specific economy of people for whom preparation was a language they spoke without thinking, checking things quietly, redistributing weight, not talking unless there was something that needed to be said. Elena rode in the second car with Vincent and Marco. No one told her to sit in the middle. She sat there anyway, between the door and the console, and watched the city move past the windows and tried to organize what was happening in her chest into something manageable. It wasn't working. Her heartbeat was wrong, not racing exactly, more like arrhythmic, hitting in unexpected places, as though her body couldn't decide whether this was danger or something past danger, something for which it didn't have an established response. Vincent sat beside her, not touching, 3 inches of space between them. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through something she couldn't see, his face in the blue-white glow of the screen, expressionless in the way of someone who has moved through enough bad nights that the approach of another one reads as work rather than crisis. "How many men does Wolf have at the pier?" she asked. "We said 30, Marco, in the front seat, not turning around. "Real count is probably 22, 25. Wolf inflates when he's scared." "Is he scared?" "He should be," Marco said. Vincent didn't look up from the phone. They drove through the industrial district, past the same streets she'd walked earlier that night, with rain coming down and her phone in her hand and 73 minutes on a clock she hadn't set. The streets were empty now. The specific empty of late night when the city stopped performing and just existed. Wet pavement reflecting orange streetlight. A traffic signal cycling through its colors for no one. She watched the signal go from green to yellow to red, and thought about her father's face when Vincent put the folder on the table, the architecture collapsing. She thought about the photograph on the phone, the blank faces in the back of the car. "They're still alive," she said. Not a question. She needed it not to be a question. "Wolf needs them alive," Vincent said without looking up. "They're his terms. He won't damage the terms before the meeting." "And after the meeting?" Now he looked up. He looked at her with the gray-green eyes, and she had the feeling she'd had at the bar. The thing she couldn't name. The quality of being assessed and found to be something specific. Something he'd adjusted his understanding around. "After the meeting," he said, "they're no longer Wolf's concern." She understood what that meant. She turned back to the window. The harbor district arrived the way harbor districts always did. Gradually and then all at once, the smell of it preceding the sight. Salt and diesel and the specific cold that came off open water at 3 a.m. The streets narrowed. The buildings changed character, became industrial and purposeful, warehouses and shipping infrastructure, and the kind of architecture that had no interest in being looked at, only in doing its function. Marco pulled the car off the main road and they went dark. Headlights off, navigating by the ambient glow of the dock security lighting, orange and yellow in patches across the wet asphalt. The other vehicles had split off at the last intersection. Elena had watched them go in different directions, and now there was nothing visible in any direction except water and dark. The car stopped. "Here," Vincent said. He looked at Elena, not with softness, with precision, like a man issuing coordinates. "You stay in this car," he said. "Doors locked. You don't get out for any reason unless Marco comes back to this door and you hear my voice behind him. Not his voice, mine. Understood?" "Understood." "If something goes wrong," he started. "Define wrong," she said. "If I'm not back in 40 minutes, he said, "Marco drives you out of the harbor district, completely out. There's an address in his phone, a woman named Celeste. She runs a residence on the north side. You go there and you stay there, and you don't use any of your existing accounts or contacts for 2 weeks minimum." Elena looked at him. "You've planned for this, for things going wrong." "I planned for everything," he said. "You sound very calm for a man about to walk into a pier with 25 armed men." Something crossed his face that might, in different lighting, have been called the beginning of a smile. It didn't fully arrive. "I've walked into worse." She believed him. She wasn't sure if that made her feel better or more aware of exactly what kind of man she'd allied herself with tonight. Both, probably. Both at once. He opened the car door. Marco was already out, coming around to the driver's side. The other men had materialized from somewhere. She could see them at the edge of the light, shadows taking on shape, moving toward the pier in a spread formation that was loose enough to look casual and tight enough to communicate something else entirely. Vincent stood outside the open door for a moment. "Elena," he said. She looked at him. "Whatever happens in there," he said. "The debt is gone. The contract is gone. That's already done. I transferred the funds an hour ago. Wolf received payment confirmation before he sent that text." He paused. "He's holding your family as a power play, not a financial one. He wants to establish something about who controls what in this city." Another pause. "That conversation is between him and me." She opened her mouth. He closed the door. She watched him walk toward the pier, and the dark took him in pieces. First his legs, then his torso, then the set of his shoulders in the charcoal overcoat, until he was one shadow among many, and then none at all. The car was very quiet. Marco had gotten into the driver's seat but had not started the engine. He sat with his hands in his lap and his eyes on the mirrors. Left, right, rear view, cycling through with the automatic regularity of someone who had done this before. The sitting and the waiting and the watching mirrors while other things happened elsewhere. Elena counted her breaths. She got to 40 before she heard the first sound. It was not what she expected. She'd been braced for gunshots. The hard percussive crack she knew from television and from the one time, years ago, when shots had been fired 2 blocks from her building and she'd heard them through her window. What she heard instead was shouting, male voices, multiple, overlapping, coming from the direction of the pier, and then a sound that was lower and stranger, metal on metal. Something heavy, a door or a gate swinging on industrial hinges. Marco's eyes went to the rear view. "Stay down," he said, without looking at her directly. She didn't stay down. She shifted to see past his shoulder through the windshield, and through the dark she could see light. Not the static orange of the dock lamps, but moving light, flashlight beams or handheld lights sweeping across the pier surface in erratic patterns. The shouting continued. She couldn't make out words. Then a sound that was definitely a gunshot. 1. Then 2 more, fast, close together. Her hand went to the door handle before she had decided to move it there. "Don't," Marco said. He still hadn't looked directly at her. His voice was flat and absolutely serious. "I will physically stop you. Don't." She took her hand off the handle. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and watched the moving lights and tried to count voices, and couldn't, and breathed and counted breaths, and lost count of those too. 4 minutes passed. Then 5. Then the lights on the pier stopped moving. The shouting stopped. The silence that came in was total and had a different quality than before. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that came after sound. The specific silence of a situation that had resolved in one direction or another. Marco's phone buzzed. He read the screen. His shoulders dropped half an inch. Barely visible, but she was watching every millimeter of him. "We're going in," he said. He started the car. They drove to the pier entrance through a chain-link gate that had been opened from the inside and along the service road that ran parallel to the water. Elena looked out the window and absorbed what she saw in pieces because taking it all at once wasn't something her brain could manage. There were men on the ground. Not all of them. Most of Wolf's people were standing, hands visible, the specific posture of people who had made a rapid and unanimous decision to stop doing whatever they'd been doing. Vincent's men moved between them with the kind of practiced containment that didn't require noise. 3 of Wolf's people were zip-tied. 2 more were sitting against a warehouse wall with the look of men who had been given a very clear explanation of their immediate future. One of Vincent's men had a cut above his eye, bleeding freely but not critically. Another was walking with a slight hitch in his gait, favoring the left side. Neither of them appeared to be stopping. Vincent was at the far end of the pier. He was standing, which was the first thing Elena registered with the specific relief of information that the body processes before the mind catches up. Standing and talking, or rather, standing and listening, because the talking was coming from the man across from him. Carver Wolf was smaller than she'd built him. This happened sometimes with men who commanded enormous fear from a distance. You finally saw them in a physical space, and the proportions were wrong. The scale was off. He was maybe 5'9", thickening through the middle, gray-haired, wearing a dark overcoat that was a slightly cheaper version of Vincent's. He had the face of a man who had once been attractive and knew it, and had spent the subsequent decades trading on the memory of it. He was talking with his hands, both of them, the gestures of someone making an argument they believe in. Between them, on a folding table that had no business being on a pier at 3 in the morning, was a manila folder. And standing 20 feet to the left, near the water's edge, held loosely by one of Vincent's men, were her father and Kyle. Elena opened the car door. Marco said, "Elena," but she was already out, feet on the wet pier surface, the cold off the water hitting her face immediately and completely, and she was walking before she'd finished deciding to walk. She got 12 feet before one of the men intercepted her. Not harshly, just a hand up, a presence. Vincent turned his head. He looked at her across the distance of the pier. Something moved in his face. Not anger, not the warmth she might have wanted. Something more practical. An assessment. Then he said something to the man near her and the man stepped aside. She walked the rest of the way. Wolf saw her coming, and his expression changed in a way she read immediately. A recalibration. The hand gestures stopped. He straightened slightly, and she understood that her presence had shifted something in the geometry of whatever conversation was happening. That she was not supposed to be here. That her being here created a variable he hadn't accounted for. Good. Ms. Hartwell, he said. His voice was the same warm, slightly avuncular quality from the phone, but it was working harder now to maintain itself. I'm glad you're safe. Shut up, she said. Wolf blinked. She turned to Vincent. Is it done? Almost, he said. What's almost? He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the manila folder from the table and held it out to her. She opened it. Inside was the document, the contract, her name at the bottom in the slot marked collateral, her father's signature above it, a notary stamp that made it all look horribly official. She looked at it long enough to confirm what it was, and then she looked at Wolf. You had this notarized, she said. Standard procedure. For what? Her voice came out cold and controlled and entirely foreign to her. She'd never spoken in this register before, had never had access to it, but it was there now, and she understood that it had been assembled from the specific materials of this night. For what is this standard procedure? What business does this in a standard way? Wolf looked at Vincent. Is she? Answer her, Vincent said. Wolf's jaw worked. He was making calculations she could see him making, visible in the shifting of his eyes, the slight adjustment of his weight. He was trying to find the version of this that had a workable exit for him. She watched him try and watched him come up against the fact that she was standing here, and Vincent was standing here, and 22 of his men were zip-tied, or standing with their hands visible, and the workable exit was narrowing. The debt is paid, Wolf said finally. I received confirmation. This whole situation is resolved. Is it? Elena said. The contract is null. Mr. Moretti settled the account. He gestured at the folder. You can burn it. I don't have copies. Vincent spoke. Reyes. From behind Wolf, one of Vincent's men appeared. He held up a tablet. On the screen was what appeared to be a file directory. She couldn't read it from where she stood, but Wolf could, and what happened to his face when he saw it was not the expression of a man looking at nothing. Digital copies, Vincent said. Server wipe completed 4 minutes ago. You had 3. He looked at Wolf with the absolute patient stillness of the jaguar. You'd like to tell me about the 4th? Wolf said nothing. There's a 4th, Vincent said. Not a question. Because there's always a 4th. You're too careful to be anything other than too careful. He stepped forward. 1 step, just 1, and the air on the pier changed the same way it had changed in the Starlight Diner when Marcus Del Rey had Elena's wrist. The 4th copy. Wolf breathed through his nose. His hands had stopped moving. He looked, suddenly and completely, like a man who understood the precise dimensions of the room he was in. Offshore server, he said. Cayman routing. I'll give you the access credentials. You'll give Reyes the access credentials, Vincent said. Now. Wolf went with Reyes. Elena stood at the table and held the folder. The pier was cold and the water was black, and the wind came off it in irregular gusts that pushed her hair across her face. She reached up and moved it and held the folder tighter. She became aware that her father and Kyle were moving toward her. Her father got there first. He looked terrible. The boiled red had drained out of his face entirely, leaving him gray, depleted, the specific pallor of a man who had been very frightened for several hours and was not yet past it. He opened his mouth. Lena, don't, she said. Not right now. He closed his mouth. Kyle stopped 6 feet away. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen on him twice in their entire lives. When their mother had left. When he was 8 and she was 4, and she was too young to understand, but Kyle had understood. The expression of a man encountering the full consequence of something he'd done and finding it heavier than he'd estimated. I called you, he said. I warned you. I know, she said. I didn't. When I went to his people, I didn't think it would. He stopped. Started over. I needed money, and I thought I could just explore options. I wasn't actually going to. Oh, Kyle. She looked at him. Just looked. I know what you were going to do. I know what you did do. I know all of it. He flinched. I don't want to talk about it here, she said. Tonight, not here. He nodded. He kept nodding, the specific repetitive motion of someone who doesn't know how to stop. Vincent returned from where Reyes and Wolf had been standing. He walked past her father without acknowledging him, past Kyle the same way, and stopped beside Elena. It's done, he said. She looked at the folder in her hands. All of it? All of it. She looked at the folder for another moment. Then she looked at Wolf, who was being walked back toward his remaining men by Reyes, who handed him off to two others. Wolf looked smaller now than when she'd first seen him across the pier. He looked like what he was, a man whose leverage had been surgically removed, standing in the cold on a wet dock at 3 a.m. with nothing left to negotiate with. She looked back at the folder. Do you have a lighter? She asked Vincent. He reached into his overcoat pocket and produced a silver lighter, flat, plain, no ornamentation. He held it out. She took it. She opened the folder and removed the contract and held it out over the water, the edge over nothing, and lit the bottom corner. The paper caught fast, the flame moving upward in a clean orange line, and she held it until the heat reached her fingers and then let it go and watched it fall, burning, turning, describing a slow arc down toward the black water until it hit the surface and went dark. She handed the lighter back to Vincent. He looked at her hand. In the light from the dock lamp, she could see a small red mark at her fingertips, 1st degree, nothing serious. He took her hand briefly, just held it for a second, turned it slightly to look at the mark, then released it. We need to move, Marco said from behind them. They did. Elena walked back along the pier toward the cars, and her father and Kyle followed at a distance, and Vincent's men moved in their quiet professional patterns around all of them, and the cold water went on and on to the left of her, and the city's lights reflected off it in broken yellow lines, and she breathed and breathed and breathed. She was halfway to the gate when the sound came, a crack, sharp and specific. From somewhere above, the level of the warehouse roof, 30 feet up, the sound of a rifle. Not a miss, a warning. Everyone on the pier hit different postures simultaneously, men dropping, scattering, hands going to jackets. Elena's body made the decision before her mind did, taking her sideways and down behind a steel equipment housing, knees on wet concrete, hands on the ground. Marco landed beside her a half-second later, his body between her and the warehouse roof, his weight forward on his hands. Stay flat, he said. From somewhere she couldn't see, Vincent's voice, not shouting, not quite, but projected, carrying, Wolf. A pause. Then from further down the pier, Wolf's voice, and the quality of it had changed. The warmth was gone. What was underneath was something older and less managed. You think this ends tonight? Wolf called out. You think you come to my pier, take my people, take the contract? I paid your debt, Vincent said. Same volume, same flat certainty. I paid it in full. We're done. We're done when I say we're done. A pause. There's a man on that roof. There are 2 more on the east dock. You walk out of here with nothing, Moretti. You walk out of here and you leave what you came in with. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold steel of the equipment housing and listened to Wolf's voice and understood that the leverage she'd watched Vincent remove had been replaced by something Wolf had kept back. Something he'd been holding the whole time as insurance, deployed now that all the other cards were gone. The pier was completely still. 20 feet away, her father and Kyle were flat on the ground. Kyle had his arms over his head. Her father, she could just see him around the edge of the housing. Her father was looking toward her, not at the warehouse roof, at her, with an expression she couldn't read at this distance and couldn't afford to try to read right now. Marco's hand came to her shoulder, brief, not grabbing, just there. 30 feet in the other direction, Vincent was standing, not crouched behind cover, standing in the open, in the middle of the pier, looking up at the warehouse roof where the rifleman was. Looking up at him with the same expression she'd seen all night, the absolute and terrible patience of something that doesn't need to hurry because it has already decided how this ends. Vincent? His name came out of her before she could stop it. He didn't look at her. He looked at the roof, and he said very quietly to the darkness above him, You fire that weapon and every man on this pier goes home in pieces, including you. The silence stretched. Marco's hand tightened fractionally on her shoulder. Elena held her breath and listened to the water and waited for the world to go one way or the other, and understood with full and complete clarity that whatever happened in the next 10 seconds would determine the rest of everything. Oh, the silence on the pier lasted 9 seconds. Elena counted them against the sound of her own heartbeat, which was doing the arrhythmic thing again, hitting in unexpected places, too loud in her ears, the cold concrete wet under her palms and Marco's hand steady on her shoulder, and the black water moving against the pilings in its indifferent, continuous way. Vincent didn't move. He stood in the open with his hands at his sides and looked up at the warehouse roof and said nothing else. Did not repeat himself. Did not add to the threat or qualify it or give Wolf's rifleman any additional information to process. He had said the thing and the thing was complete, and now the waiting was the message. On the roof, something shifted. Elena couldn't see it clearly from her position behind the equipment housing, but she felt it. The quality of the silence changed. The specific change that comes when a decision is being made somewhere close to you. She heard a sound she couldn't immediately identify. Metal on metal, small, deliberate. Then she understood what it was. A rifle being placed down on a flat surface. Not fired, set down. The 10 seconds that followed were the dismantling of Carver Wolf's last position, and they happened fast and without drama. The men on the east dock that Wolf had mentioned, 2 of them, she learned later, each covering an angle, made the same calculation the riflemen had made. The math on the roof had resolved itself, and they could see it from their positions. And they made the rational choice that men make when the alternative to the rational choice is being carried out in pieces. Marco lifted his hand from her shoulder. Up, he said. Stay close. She stood. Her knees were wet from the concrete, and her hands were shaking again, the fine internal kind, and she pressed them against her thighs and straightened and found Vincent in the space ahead of her, still standing, not touched. She breathed out. The breath came out unsteady at the end, and she pressed her lips together and made the next one steadier. Wolf was being walked to the center of the pier by 2 of Vincent's men. He moved with the specific, careful steps of a man who understood that the margin for error had compressed to almost nothing. The avuncular warmth was entirely gone. What was underneath it was not ferocity. She'd half expected ferocity, the revealed violence underneath the smooth presentation. What was underneath was simpler and sadder than that. It was just a man who had run out of moves. Vincent turned once they brought Wolf to him. He looked at Wolf for a long moment without speaking. The 3 on the roof and east dock, he said. They walk. Wolf blinked. It was not what he'd expected to hear. I said they walk, Vincent repeated. All your people walk. Tonight. He paused. In exchange, you and I are going to have a different conversation than the one we were having. Wolf looked at him with the exhausted wariness of a man being handed something that might be a gift and might be a trap, and didn't have the resources left to tell the difference. What conversation? The one where you tell me everything the black serpents have been running through the Eastern Harbor for the last 2 years, Vincent said. The women, the network, the clients, the routes. He held Wolf's gaze. All of it. Every name, every transaction, every moving part. You give me that, your men walk, and you walk. And this city gets smaller for you, but you stay in it. You refuse. He stopped. The not finishing of the sentence was its own completion. Wolf's jaw worked. He was doing the calculation again, the one Elena had watched him do twice already tonight, looking for exits. This time the calculation took longer because there were fewer variables. Finally, his shoulders moved, not quite a shrug, something more like a structural surrender, a load-bearing wall deciding to come down. How long do I have? Wolf said. You start tonight, Vincent said. Reyes stays with you. You're done by morning. Wolf looked around the pier at his men, standing with their hands visible, the zip-tied ones against the wall. He looked at the water. He looked at the city lights reflecting off the surface. He looked at all of it with the expression of a man saying goodbye to a version of himself. Tonight, he said. Tonight, Vincent confirmed. Wolf went with Reyes. Elena stood and watched him go and felt something she couldn't fully name. Not satisfaction, not relief, not the clean resolution that movies had trained her to expect from moments like this. Something more complicated. Something that acknowledged that what had just been arranged was a kind of rough and imperfect justice, administered by a man who operated entirely outside the systems that were supposed to provide it. and that the imperfection of it was inseparable from the fact that it was the only version of it she was going to get. She could live with that. She thought she could live with that. Vincent came to where she was standing. He looked her over. The medic assessment, top to bottom, checking for damage. "You're okay," he said. "You keep saying that," she said. "You keep being okay," he said. "I keep being surprised." She looked at him. "Are you hurt?" He seemed briefly caught off guard by the question. Not the question itself, but the direction of it. The fact of being asked rather than asking. "No," he said. "Your man with the cut above his eye. 12 stitches, maybe. He's had worse." He paused. "The one with the limp took a hit to the ribs. Bruised, not broken. He'll be angry about it for a week." She nodded. Behind her, somewhere in the middle distance of the pier, she could hear her father. Not words, just sound. The quality of his breathing in the cold air. The specific rhythm of a man who had been terrified for hours and was slowly coming back from it. She didn't turn around. Not yet. "I need a minute," she said to Vincent. He understood what she meant. He stepped away. She turned around. Her father was sitting on a dock cleat, one of the iron posts used for mooring lines, with his big hands between his knees and his head slightly forward, like something in his neck had given out. He looked old. Not older than his years exactly, but old in a way that was new tonight. A quality of age that hadn't been there before or that she'd never been able to see clearly before. Kyle was standing a few feet away from him, leaning against a pier support beam with his arms crossed and his eyes on the ground. She walked to them. Her father looked up when she got close enough. "Lena," he said. His voice was wrecked. Not drunk wrecked, just emptied. She stood in front of him and looked at him and let herself do the thing she'd been putting off since she saw the photograph on the phone. Really look. Past the anger, past the cold clarity she'd been running on all night, past the protection of her own numbness. She looked at him the way you look at something you've spent a long time not looking at directly because you weren't sure you could survive looking at it directly. What she saw was a man. Just a man. Ordinary in his damage, ordinary in his failures, ordinary in the specific way that ordinary people committed extraordinary harm, and then woke up the next day and still needed to eat breakfast and still had to find a way to exist inside what they'd done. Nothing monstrous, nothing that required a special category. Just a man who had been afraid and weak and selfish in ways that had costs he'd let other people pay. That was almost worse than a monster. "You signed my name," she said. Her voice came out even. "You picked up a pen and you signed my name." Her father's jaw worked. "Don't tell me what you were," she said. "Don't explain it to me. I don't want the story you've built around it." She paused. "I want to know if you understand what you did. Not what circumstances led to it, what the act was, what it meant." He was quiet for a long moment. His hands moved between his knees, the fingers interlacing and releasing in a slow, nervous rhythm. "I know what I did," he said finally. "Do you?" "Yes." His voice broke on the word. Not dramatically, just the small, structural failure that voices had when they'd been running on adrenaline and fear, and were now being asked to carry something heavier. "I know exactly what I did." She studied his face. She was looking for the lie again, the angle, the preemptive self-defense. She found something different. She found what she thought was genuine, if not remorse exactly, then the comprehension that preceded remorse. The phase before a person had finished absorbing what they'd done and found the feeling that matched it. She'd never seen that in him before. She wasn't certain it was real. She was certain she didn't have the energy tonight to determine whether it was or not. "You're leaving the city," she said. "Both of you." That was the arrangement, and it stands. Her father nodded. She looked at Kyle. Kyle had lifted his eyes from the ground. He was looking at her with the expression she'd seen on him on the pier, the one from their childhood, the weight of a consequence fully received. He looked young in it. Not the youth of innocence, but the youth of someone who had been playing at being older and tougher and more managed than he was, and had finally been stripped back to what he actually was, which was a frightened person who had made choices he couldn't undo. "You came to Vincent first," she said to him. He didn't flinch away from it. "Yes." 3 weeks ago. "Yes." She waited. "I told myself it was I was going to see what he said and then not do it," Kyle said. His voice was low. That's what I told myself. That I was just exploring. He stopped. I know how that sounds. It sounds like what it is, she said, which is that some part of you had already decided and the rest of you hadn't caught up yet. He looked down again. Kyle. She waited until he looked up. You called me. 45 minutes before midnight, you called me. It wasn't enough, he said. I know it wasn't. No, she said. It wasn't enough. It was also the only thing you had left and you used it. She breathed. I don't know what to do with that yet. I don't know what it means about you or about us or about anything, but I know it happened and I'm holding it somewhere separate, like you were told to. He stared at her. She saw him try to find something to say and fail and then simply absorb what she'd given him, which was not forgiveness and not condemnation, which was maybe the honest thing, the real thing, the only thing she actually had to give him right now. Somewhere separate, he repeated. Somewhere separate, she confirmed. She stood there for another moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her jacket and found the crumpled $3 from the trucker in Ohio. Still there, transferred from apron to jacket when she'd changed her shoes at the safe house without thinking, and looked at them for a second and put them back. She turned around and walked back toward the cars. The drive out of the harbor district was quiet. Elena sat in the back of the second car and watched the city through the window and felt the night beginning to separate from her. Not fall away exactly, but settle, like sediment after water has been disturbed. Everything going to the bottom slowly in layers. Her father's face on the dock cleat, the burning contract falling toward black water, 9 seconds of silence with a rifle on a rooftop, the cold of the pier concrete on her palms, all of it going to the bottom. She didn't know yet what would be left at the surface when it finished settling. She didn't know who she was going to be on the other side of tonight. She'd been a certain kind of person for a long time, the kind organized around surviving the people closest to her, around being small and careful and useful and present enough to be kept, but not so present as to be targeted. That kind of person required a specific threat to exist against. Without the threat, she wasn't sure the shape held. She thought, I don't know yet. That's okay. She thought, I don't know yet. And that is the first okay thing I've felt all night. Vincent sat beside her in the same 3 inches of space and said nothing. He was looking out his own window, and she looked at his profile in the moving light of the city. The angular jaw, the lines at the corners of his eyes that weren't from laughing. The quality of a man who had been through many nights like this one, and had stopped being surprised by them without ever becoming entirely indifferent to them. And she thought about what he'd told her at the safe house. I grew up in a house where women got hurt. She thought about the way he'd looked at the diner when Marcus Del Rey grabbed her wrist. Not appalled, just certain. The certainty of a man who had seen the exact shape of that moment before and knew precisely what it cost and had decided a long time ago what he did when he encountered it. She thought about Kyle going to him 3 weeks ago and Vincent saying no. She thought about the diner, the corner booth, the 2 hours of watching before he said a single word to her. She thought about all of it, and she thought, I don't know who you are. And underneath that, I know more of who you are than I know of most people. And underneath that, quieter, the thing she was least certain how to handle. That matters to me. She didn't say any of it. They drove. The safe house again, briefly. She collected the coffee tin and the manila envelope, the photograph of herself and her high school friend squinting into the sun, and stood in the anonymous clean room while Marco coordinated her father and Kyle's transportation out of the district. She didn't go out to say goodbye. She wasn't ready for goodbye. Goodbye was going to be its own thing, its own separate work, and she was going to do it on her own terms and her own timeline, and tonight was not the night. At 4:30 in the morning, Vincent drove her himself, no Marco, to a hotel on the north side. Not glamorous, but clean and anonymous, and not connected to any part of her life. He walked her to the lobby and stopped at the entrance. Rooms under a different name, he said, paid for 2 weeks. The woman at the desk knows not to answer questions about guests. He handed her a phone, not her own, a new one, still in its slim box. Numbers you need are already in it. Mine is in there too. She took the phone, turned it over in her hands. What happens to Wolf? She asked. He talks to Reyes through the morning, Vincent said. What he gives us goes to people I trust. The network gets dismantled. The clients get identified. He paused. Most of them will face consequences. Some won't. That's not a clean answer. No, she said. It's an honest one. He looked at her. The women, she said. The ones who were already in the system. What happens to them? That's more complicated, he said. It takes longer, but it starts tonight. He held her gaze. It starts because of tonight. She absorbed that. Let it be what it was. Not perfect. Not the clean resolution of a system working the way systems were supposed to work, but real. Something real had happened tonight. Something had shifted in the specific geography of harm that Carver Wolf had been operating inside for 2 years. Women she didn't know and would never meet were going to wake up eventually to a different situation because of a contract with her name on it being dropped burning into black water. She didn't know what to do with that either. She was accumulating a lot of things she didn't know what to do with. Get some sleep, Vincent said. You keep telling me that. You keep needing it. She almost smiled. Not quite. The shape of it was there without the completion. She looked at him standing in the hotel lobby entrance, the overcoat still on, the collar turned up slightly against the pre-dawn cold. The city was gray and quiet at this hour, the specific gray that came before light when the night was finishing its work. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixed. The other kind. The accumulated kind. The weight of years of being the person in the room who decided things, and bore the consequences of deciding them, and woke up the next day and kept deciding. She thought about what he'd said in the safe house. Somewhere beneath the machinery lives a man desperate to prove he has not completely lost himself. She hadn't said that out loud. He hadn't said it either, but it had been in the room. Vincent, she said. He looked at her. She wanted to say something that was proportionate to the night, something that acknowledged what had been given and what it had cost, and what it meant that a man like him had walked into a dying diner and sat in the corner booth and watched a waitress flinch and stayed anyway. She wanted words that were equal to the weight of it. She didn't have them. Maybe there weren't any. Thank you, she said instead. And then, because it was the truest thing she had, I'll pay you back. Something moved in his face. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said. I'll pay you back anyway. Not the money. The other thing. She held his gaze. Whatever it cost you to be what you were tonight, I'm going to do something with this. With getting out. I'm going to make it worth what you spent on it. He looked at her for a long moment. The gray-green eyes, the absolute patience, and underneath it, she saw it clearly for the first time, unguarded, the thing that had been there in pieces all night. Something that looked like what a man looked like when he'd stopped expecting anything good from the world, and then the world handed him evidence against its own verdict. He nodded once. Not small. The nod of a man who believed what he was nodding at. Then he turned and walked back out into the gray pre-dawn, and she watched through the lobby glass as he got into the car, and the car pulled away, and the taillights disappeared around the corner. She stood there for a moment in the warm lobby light. Then she took the elevator up. 7 months passed. The coffee tin funded the security deposit. The security deposit got her a commercial space on a corner in a neighborhood that was not fashionable but was alive. The kind of neighborhood where people walked to the corner store and knew the block and showed up when something opened. She painted the walls herself, a warm cream color, 3 coats because she wanted it right. She sourced the equipment over 2 months, buying used where she could and investing where she couldn't afford not to. She learned things. How to read a commercial lease, how to register a business, how to talk to a health inspector, how to negotiate a flower delivery contract. The terrified waitress learned a lot of things. She named it Haven Bakery and Cafe. She'd thought about other names, but Haven was the one that fit, because it was the true thing. Not the pretty thing, not the aspirational thing, but the accurate thing. She wanted it to be a haven because she understood firsthand what the absence of one felt like, and she believed that understanding was worth building something around. She opened on a Wednesday morning in early spring with croissants and coffee and a handmade sign in the window and 3 customers in the first hour, all of them from the immediate block. By the end of the first month, she had regulars. By the end of the third, she had a waiting list for weekend morning tables. She worked long hours, and she didn't apologize for them. She hired a part-time assistant, a woman named Greta who was 56 and had been between jobs for 2 years, and who turned out to be extraordinary with pastry dough. They developed a shorthand fast, the kind that grew in kitchens between people who paid attention to each other, and Elena found that she liked this. The being seen and understood in small, practical ways. The knowledge that she could trust what Greta handed her without checking it. She spoke to Kyle twice. The first time, 3 weeks after the pier, he called from a city 300 miles away, and the conversation was short and awkward and real, in the way that conversations were real when the people having them had stopped pretending. He had a job, a legitimate one, something in logistics. She didn't ask for details. He sounded sober. She didn't ask about that either. They agreed to talk again, and both of them understood that the talking was going to happen in pieces, slowly, across a long time, with no guarantee of destination. She didn't speak to her father. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. She thought about what it would cost her when it happened, and she thought about what it might cost her if it never happened, and she held both things honestly and allowed herself not to decide. She was not ready, and not being ready was allowed. She thought about this often, the permission to be not ready. She'd spent so many years moving at the speed the people around her required that she'd lost track of her own pace. Finding it again was slow and sometimes uncomfortable, like learning to walk normally after a long time of walking wrong. Her pace was quieter than she'd expected. She liked it. She sent a message to the number Vincent had put in the phone on the morning she got her business license. It said, "I'm building something. Thought you should know." She didn't expect a response. She sent it because it felt important to document the moment to the person who had made the moment possible, the way you might tell a doctor about a recovery they'd started. He responded 4 hours later. 2 words. "I know." She sat with those 2 words for a long time and thought about the black sedan. She'd noticed it twice in the month before she opened. Once parked across the street from her building late at night, once in the lot adjacent to the space she eventually signed for. Both times it was gone before she could decide whether to approach it. Both times she'd stood at her window and felt something she couldn't entirely sort out. Not fear, not the warmth she might have wanted to feel, something between them. The feeling of knowing she was not invisible. The feeling of being watched by something that meant the watching as protection rather than possession. She didn't know what to do with Vincent Moretti. She suspected she would spend a long time not knowing, and that this was not entirely a problem. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, 13 months after the night at the Starlight Diner, the rain season arriving again, the city outside her window doing the thing it did in October, where the light went flat and gold, and everything looked briefly like somewhere beautiful. The bell above the bakery door chimed. She was frosting cupcakes. Lemon, for a birthday order going out the next morning. Her forearms were dusted with powdered sugar, and she had a smear of something on her left wrist that she'd been meaning to wipe off for 10 minutes. She looked up. Vincent stood in the doorway. He was in a gray suit this time, not the overcoat. No armor, she thought, and then caught herself, because that wasn't quite right either. The suit was still him. The stillness was still him. The weight of who he was still filled the space he walked into. He'd just chosen, for this particular Tuesday, to come without some of the outer layers. She noticed the difference. She noticed that she was glad to see him. She noticed that she was not afraid. She set down the frosting spatula. "Coffee?" she said. "Black," he said. "Sit down," she said. "I'll bring it to you." Something moved in his face. She caught the recognition. She'd used his words, his specific construction, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it held a small, quiet piece of the entire year between them. He sat at the corner table. She brought the coffee and a chocolate croissant she hadn't planned to bring. She set both down and then sat across from him because she wanted to sit across from him, and because this was her table in her place and she could choose where she sat. He looked at the croissant. "I didn't order this." "No," she said. "I'm giving it to you." He picked it up, took a bite. She watched him chew and she thought, this is not a moment that looks like anything. From the outside, this is a woman and a man at a corner table in a small bakery in a neighborhood that hadn't been on anyone's map. From the outside, there is nothing here. From the inside, there was everything. They sat for a long time without talking, and the silence was not the silence of people with nothing to say, but the silence of people who had already said the necessary things and were now simply present with each other, which was different, which was rarer than most people understood. He told her, at some point, that Wolf's information had led to 11 arrests in the Eastern Harbor network. 3 of the women who'd been moved through the system had been located and connected to support services. 2 more were still being searched for. It was imperfect. It was real. She listened and nodded and didn't pretend the imperfection wasn't there and didn't let the imperfection eat the realness. She told him about Greta and the pastry dough and the waiting list for weekend tables and the birthday order going out tomorrow. She told him about the commercial lease renewal she'd negotiated herself last month. She told him about the coffee tin, which she'd kept, dented, empty now, sitting on the shelf above the register. Not as a relic of something terrible, but as evidence of a version of herself who had saved $3,000 against the dark and been right to do it. He listened the way he'd listened in the diner, so completely, without performing completeness, just actually there. When he finally stood to leave, he put money on the table. She didn't tell him not to. She also put it in the jar by the register that she kept for a women's shelter 2 blocks north rather than in the till, but she didn't tell him that either. She kept some things for herself. He stopped at the door. "You said you'd make it worth what was spent," he said. He looked at the room, the warm cream walls, the light coming through the front window in the way it came through in October, the smell of vanilla and coffee, and the specific warmth of a space that had been built with intention. He looked at all of it. Then he looked at her. "You did," he said. The bell above the door chimed once as he left. Elena stood behind the counter and watched the gray suit disappear into the afternoon, and then she picked up the frosting spatula and went back to the cupcakes. Her hands were steady. The October light lay across the wooden floors in long, warm rectangles. Somewhere in the neighborhood a bus went by, and a dog barked at it, and someone on the street outside laughed at something she couldn't see. The city kept moving. It had always kept moving. The difference was that she was no longer being moved by it. She was standing still inside it, inside something she had built, inside the evidence of her own survival, and the standing still felt, for the first time in her life, like exactly the right speed. She frosted the cupcakes. She turned the sign on the door from open to closed. She went into the kitchen and started prep for tomorrow, because tomorrow was coming and there were people who had already asked for what she was making, and she intended to have it ready. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The end. All characters, events, and organizations in this story are entirely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes.